The Literary Corner, brought to you by New York Parrot TV, the voice for humanity. Hi, welcome to New York Parrot Literary Corner. I'm Dustin Pickering, your noble and honest host. As promised, today we have Ryan Guth, an Ohioan by birth. He's the author of two mixed genre novels, Home Truths and Part of Homage to Masters, and the more recent Body and Soul. A student of poets Sandra Kohler, Christopher Buckley, Don Bogan, and Andrew Hudgens, who holds a PhD in English Studies from the University of Cincinnati. Ryan is married, has one son, and currently lives in Jackson, Tennessee, where he teaches at Jackson State Community College. And as promised, we're going to talk about Edgar Lee Masters in the upcoming edition of Selected Poetry. So my first question, Ryan, is why is a new edition, a new selected edition of Masters, why do you think that's a necessary and a positive contribution to American letters?
Well, first some dates. It is not just new, it is the only selected poems to have been issued since Masters put out his own in 1925. So what is that, 96 years and counting? Since there has been a good book-length selection, this will be the only one, in fact, that represents his entire career.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So this is a comprehensive volume.
Yes. This covers his work from from about the 1890s up through the mid-1940s. He was a practicing publishing writer for a little over 50 years.
So what value do you believe Masters' work brings to the contemporary world?
Well, that's not a hard question at all, is it? Everyone's reasonably familiar with Spoon River. If you have read 3 books in your life, there's a chance that Spoon River or some excerpts from it have shown up in your reading, but it only gives us one side of him. He was a major figure on the landscape in the first half of the 20th century, the teens through the 30s and 40s. He is both old-fashioned and new-fashioned. He is a modernist in his own fashion. He was interested in the use of multiple perspectives. He was a proponent of free verse, but also very skilled at formal verse. He's just a fine writer. He would be welcome. He should be welcome at any time.
I think so too. And you mentioned multiple perspectives in his work. How do you think Spoon River, for instance, how does that reflect multiple perspectives? How does he address the idea of multiple perspectives in Spoon River?
It's 244 individual epitaph poems, each one named for the individual who is speaking the poem. Many of them comment on each other. One will give us a piece of a story, then the next page or 5 pages or 20 pages later, you get another piece of the story. Sometimes you hear from everybody involved. Sometimes you only hear from a couple of people. So he took the idea of fractured and multiple perspectives and went his own way with it.
Interesting. And so is there a layer of narrative within Spoon River, do you think? There's a set of stories being told over a particular branch of time, or is it something more less linear than that?
Kind of both.
Mm-hmm.
There is a perceptible structure, but you have to have it pointed out to you before you can really see it clearly. He starts with what he calls the one birth minds, people who really weren't much good, the no counts, the criminals, and so forth. And gradually the larger of soul start to make their appearance. He called it kind of a divine comedy, going from the lowest to the highest regions of the human spirit. He also counted, I haven't checked him on this, but he counted there were 29 different stories floating through the books that you would get pieces of here and there as you go. But as for an overall narrative, probably not. The dates of the lives probably run the length of the 19th century. There are a few people who were around during the American Revolution, and they go up through the early automobiles.
So there's a pretty wide branch, couple of generations there, it sounds like. And he addresses the different types of people. I mean, from ruffians to, philosophers and their approach to looking at things. I do remember quite a bit of when I read it, there was different philosophical angles and
absolutely
different political angles as well. I mean, there's a lot of, little, political issues in there. Do you know how his work reflected his own personal political values?
He's what we would probably call today an old-fashioned liberal.
Mm-hmm.
He believed in equality.
Mm-hmm.
All men are created equal. He had maybe a little more trouble with women, but some of that was personal. His female characters are larger than the impressions that he had of women in his own life, if that makes any kind of sense. Now I've lost track of the question. I'm sorry.
Quite all right. That's interesting. Do you think maybe in a sense he was kind of overcompensating for when he wrote his women characters, that when he created them, I guess, more exuberant than when his views of them in real life was maybe he overcompensating for a repressed misogyny of some kind, or maybe like a bitterness towards women from his bad experiences?
He personally was bitter toward women and somewhat misogynistic in his personal life, but I find his work to be much, much less so. In fact, there are some poems in the book we are putting out that are very forward-looking for the time in which they were written in terms of sexual equality. Like a lot of writers, he put the best of himself in his work.
Right.
Life is often kind of vestigial by comparison to the work.
That kind of brings into the question of, we talk a lot about in today's literary world, the artist separated from the art. And that's one example of the opposite tendency that we hear so much about. Like, we'll hear about there's misogyny in the work, but but you don't hear much about the artist himself or herself being a certain kind of person. It's usually like they address the work from a perspective of looking at the values there. And here we have the exact opposite. He has a little bit of a chip on his shoulder maybe, and he's writing from a perspective of this is more of an romanticized or ideal version of how he sees things. Maybe that's cool.
Ideal, at least, if not fantasy. His work is better. He sees more largely. He sees in wholes. He sees people for who they are better, I think, in his work than in his personal life.
How has the role of poet changed from his time to today's time, and our views towards poetry and writers changed? Is it more difficult now to be a writer with all the various political correctness and questions out there, about the integrity of your characters? I mean, there's really seems to be a lot of scrutiny of writers. Was there some trouble like that in during his period as well?
Less of that sort of thing. I think the larger difference is in what kind of a public writers can expect today. Spoon River Anthology, not to keep beating that particular drum, Spoon River Anthology is the single best-selling book of poetry in American history. It was first printed as a book in 1915 and has never been out of print, which is extraordinary for an individual collection of poems, something that is not a selected or a collected poems. And he was able to make a living as a writer. subsequent to Spoon River. Not a huge living, but
Right.
he was eventually able to give up his law practice a few years after Spoon River came out and did not hold any other kind of job after that point. And that is, I don't know if there is a single pro publishing today who does not have a day job somewhere.
Right. Very true. So tell us a little bit about Masters, his transition from an attorney to a literary figure. I mean, what prompted that for him?
My sense is that he never considered the law his vocation. His father was a lawyer, and he needed to make a living, so he studied law in his father's office. Apparently, the study of law itself was rather more informal than it is now. He was able to read law, as the phrase went, with his father and take the bar exam, and he was extraordinarily bright. Of course, he was able to pass the bar exam and set himself up in practice, moved himself to Chicago, not to become a lawyer, but to get into the literary world, the Chicago Renaissance of the time. And he thought he would work as a lawyer for a while he built up his literary reputation. Unfortunately for him, that took a great deal longer than he had hoped. So the transition was a very lengthy one. But he claimed always to have hated the law, though he was apparently quite good at it and made a pretty decent pile.
So he was involved with Clarence Darrow, I believe, and did he have any say in the famous Scopes trial? Was he involved in that?
Not to my knowledge. It's been a while since I have read Herbert Russell's excellent biography, but they parted ways in the teens, I believe, and the Scopes trial is 1925. I don't know that they were really much in contact by that point. Although, ironically, Darrow represented Masters' first wife in their divorce proceedings.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Yeah, there's some conflict of interest for you.
Right. So how did that work out? What his relationship with his wife and the divorce?
He married for the wrong reasons. He was always interested in a beautiful woman, as many of them as he could get hold of. But he married, particularly this woman, not just for her beauty, but for her money. She came from a wealthy family, and his thought was that he could live in the style to which he would like to become accustomed while writing, doing his own work. And they were so different that it was really rather unbearable for both of them, is the sense I got.
Interesting. A very conflicted personality.
It was just a terrible match.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. If you go for the wrong reasons, you go into something, and sometimes that happens, and you don't really think clearly on it, and then you jump into something, or you get involved in a situation, and the various conflicts come out, and it's not quite what you expected.
Yes. And when it came to sex and romantic relationships, Masters never thought very clearly.
How would you relate your own poetry to Masters' work in your scholarship in Edgar Lee Masters?
This project actually started when I was in graduate school. I went for a creative writing experience for my master's and my doctorate. I went to schools that offered creative writing tracks, but I brought with me this idea, and I actually studied with a professor at the University of Cincinnati working on the selection and early versions of the introduction that I wrote. She was a big help to me, and she's mentioned in my acknowledgments, which reminds me, I need to let her know that this book is finally coming out. But they sort of went along side by side during my graduate career, and Masters has been a considerable influence, particularly in home truths, I think, the Midwestern setting, and I've borrowed my own version of the different perspectives, and I've even tossed in a couple of allusions to Masters' work for the knowledgeable to find at their leisure or pleasure.
Interesting. There's a little sleuthing going on in there for the reader.
A little bit,
Roots.
yes.
Mm-hmm.
A line or two, a couple of names.
Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit about Home Truths. What is the I don't know, I guess you could call it the premise of the collection. What are you exploring there? A little bit about some of the mysteries involved in that book.
The premise, I suppose, is that you can never know about things you didn't see yourself. You can, and here is again the influence of Masters. You get bits of stories, as I did growing up, about a rift between my father and my maternal grandmother. And I only got bits and pieces here and there and never quite knew how to put them together. They were very uncomfortable together. After a while, my father even stopped coming to family holiday gatherings, or he would go for an hour or so and then leave. And my mother and I would have to get a ride home from one of our other relatives.
Mm-hmm.
He would make sort of general complaints and criticisms about her, but nothing terribly specific. And those unfinished stories stayed in my head for many, many years. And when I moved back to Ohio, my wife and I had moved away from Ohio for many years. We came back for my graduate study. Cincinnati, where I was studying, was only about 50 miles from Dayton, where I grew up. And I took the opportunity to hunt down a few people who were still left who knew them both, or at least one or the other, and could fill in some of the blanks. And the process of filling in the blanks became part of the book as well. One part is called, I think, Artifacts,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a representation of photographs and letters that I was able to assemble,
Mm-hmm.
even physical objects. Then there's a section called Conjectures, where I imagined how certain events might have gone based on what I found out. And then the last section tries to put all of that together into some sort of wisdom, some sort of understanding of the story and the lives.
Interesting. So what was it that in that specific aspect of your life that brought you to writing about it?
At the time I embarked on the book, you mean?
Yeah. Why was this an important thing for you to pursue in literary form?
Gosh, I've never thought to ask myself that. But if I go back to the circumstances, my mother was in a nursing home with Alzheimer's disease, and she had always been the family historian. And some of the bits and pieces came from her. And by the time the book came to me, she was past recall. She had very little of her faculties left. And I suppose unconsciously, I had the idea that the chance to find out was rapidly slipping away.
Mm-hmm.
I had inherited a huge batch of old correspondence when my parents' house was sold. We found in one of their dresser drawers literally hundreds of letters from about 50 years, covering a span of about 50 years of family history. And those were some of the additional bits and pieces. They gave me some background and some context that I hadn't had before. And some of those letters showed up in the book. I rewrote them here and there. I retouched things to make them say more what I was after, but that was part of the reclamation as well. My parents' lives were pretty much scattered to the winds, and there were these few artifacts left, and it just seemed like there's no time like the present.
Right.
To do whatever I could. And the initial rift between my father and my grandmother, both of whom I love very much, I guess was indelible on its own. It was something that had never been solved in my own mind. I suppose I wanted some sort of resolution.
It's interesting. So it was a sort of the elements that were presented to you around the time of the writing. You sort of were pulling together things that kind of give you some ideas as to why this happened, why this rift happened, and you wrote and you sort of speculate in the book of what was going on. I remember one of the things I've noticed is that in the collection was your father was a sci-fi writer, and
yes.
There was the issue with the funeral home, and it seems like that he had a little bit of a bitterness about not being able to pursue science fiction as a career because he ended up taking so many responsibilities at the funeral home. If I understand that, that's what I understood from the book.
That was my father's version of the story. And that is to an extent true, but it's more complicated than that. My grandmother had been left very suddenly. My grandfather died of a heart attack when he was on a funeral job, and the only thing he left her was the business which they operated out of the first floor of their home. There was literally no other inheritance. There was the physical structure of the building, the space in which the funeral home was conducted. There were a couple of funeral cars, fortunately all paid for, and that was it. In fact, she ended up having to pay a state inheritance tax to go on living in her home. It would have been seized if she had not scraped together the money to pay for it. So there was a matter of economic survival for her. And my father and mother volunteered to come and live with them in exchange for work that, as I understand it, was part-time in nature. It wasn't full-time. There were some interruptions. The work by its nature was unpredictable, so he could be taken away from his work. But there was also a drying up of the kind of venues for the work he was doing. Pulps were dying out. You had more literary fiction. You had the Iowa Writers Workshop starting to produce folks like Flannery O'Connor, who were writing literary fiction, which was not really my father's bent.
Right.
And that was where magazine publication was going at that time. So there were some other factors involved for him.
Right. Very interesting story. We'll come back from a brief break to talk with you a little more about also Body and Soul. I'm curious to kind of pick your brain about that. But we'll take a brief break. We'll be right back in just a second with some works by Ryan Guth.
Very good.
I'm at that age where I appreciate every sunrise, sunset, and all the hours in between. The age that causes me to notice the rhythmic timing of each breath. A reminder to thank God for granting me another day. I'm at that age where joints begin to stiffen and maybe I don't move as fluently as I did at 22. But I'm also at that age where I realize many didn't even get to see today. So I pray on bent and aching knee, thank you God for blessing me. I'm at that age where I notice my kids making some of the same mistakes that I did. And I remind myself that although never easy, I made it through and so will they. I'm at that age where I understand that money never buys true happiness. But I'm also at that age where I understand it definitely does help to have a bit. I'm at that age where six-pack abs still attract. But I'm also at that age where the behavior of a true gentleman will stop me in my tracks. I'm at that age where I know what it means to be a woman alone with how to treat my man. Beginning with listening as he explains what he needs from me. You see, there may be many similarities, but all men are not the same. I'm at that age where I realize good things don't come to those who wait. They go to those who educate, plan, sacrifice, work, and repeat over and over and over again. I'm at that age where I appreciate spending time with family, whether we're on good terms or not. Because I'm at that age where I'm losing so many people that I care about. I'm at that age where I'm bearing down on that age where there are more chapters of my life in past instead of future tense. But I'm at that age where I refuse to give up. I continue to climb, to create, to improve, love, and share, bearing my soul to the universe while honoring my ancestors, my God, and myself, while becoming the best version of me possible, because I'm at that age.
Hi, this is the most amazing collection I have read so far. I'm a readingaholic, Dustin Pickering. You know me from Parrot Literary Corner. This is the Literary Parrot, available at Amazon.com and its various affiliates. If you have not seen this collection, it's 249 pages of glorious global literature in a contemporary vein. This covers a lot of subjects from the coronavirus to violence on the streets, to love, to romance. Everything you can imagine is in this collection, and you should buy it now. I'll tell you why. It's a collection of unique voices from the Literary Parrot. People have been on our show, have been participated in this, or have been published on our website, newyorkparrot.com. So please, I implore you, buy a copy. Thank you, and
Parrot TV, the voice for humanity.
Hi, welcome back to the Literary Corner, Parrot TV. We have Dr. Ryan Guth with us. He's going to share some works. If you want to start either with a couple of Edgar Lee Masters from the collection, or you can read one of your own. You take your pick, however you want to do it.
Why don't we start with our friend Eddie Lee?
All right. Is he a new member of Van Halen? I'm just kidding. I said, is he a new member of Van Halen?
He's opening for him, I think, next week.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I buy a ticket to that.
The Spoon River solo. And just to remind our viewers, you can leave comments on the YouTube as you're watching, questions you may have for us on the program here for our guest. If you're just curious, you want to know a little something interesting, just ask away, leave some comments for us. How are you enjoying the program? I hope you're, and really getting some knowledge here from Ryan and from myself and their questions. So we're enjoying a great conversation on Edgar Lee Masters and your own work, Ryan, and some interesting kind of picking the brain about human motivations and things going on in the world with poetry.
I thought since the issue of masters and women and political correctness came up, that I would start with this one called In the Cage.
Okay.
Which is from, I should know this, from a 1916 collection. So this is a little over 100 years old.
Okay.
And the setup, the situation is a man having spent the night with a woman he's not married to in a hotel room in Chicago. He is the speaker of the poem. The sounds of midnight trickle into the roar of morning over the water growing blue. At 10 o'clock, the August sunbeams pour a blinding flood on Michigan Avenue. But yet the half-drawn shades of bottle green leave the recesses of the room with misty auras drawn around their gloom, where things lie undistinguished, scarcely seen. You, standing between the window and the bed, are edged with rainbow colors. And I lie drowsy, with quizzical, half-open eye, musing upon the contour of your head, watching you comb your hair, clothed in a corset waist, a skirt of silk which reaches to your knees and makes your bare and delicate legs by contrast white as milk. And as you toss your head to comb its tresses, they flash upon me like long stripes of sand between a moonlit sea, pale as your hand, and a red sun that on a high dune stresses its sanguine heat. And then at times your lips, protruding, half unconscious, half in scorn, engage my eyes while looking through the morn at the clear oval of your brow brought full over the sovereign largeness of your eyes, or at your breasts that shake not as you pull the comb through stubborn tangles, only rise, scarcely perceptible with breath or sighs, firm, unmaternal, like a young bacchante's, or at your nose profoundly dipped like Dante's over your chin that softly melts away. Now you seem fully under my heart's sway. I have slipped through the magic of your mesh, freed once again and strengthened by your flesh. You seem a weak thing for a strong man's play. Yet I know now that we shall scarce have parted when I shall think of you, half heavy-hearted. I know our partings. You will faintly smile and look at me with eyes that have no guile or have too much, and pass into the sphere where you keep independent life. Meanwhile, how do you live without me is the fear. You do not lean upon me, ask my love, or wonder of other loves I may have hidden under these casual renewals of our love. And if I loved you, I should lie in flame and go about remurmuring your name, and these are things a man should be above. Yet, as I lie here on the imminent brink of soul's surrender into your soul's power, and in the white light of the morning hour, I see what life would be if we should link our lives together in a marriage pact. For we would walk along a boundless tract of perfect hell. But your disloyalty would be of spirit, for I have not won, mastered, and bound your spirit unto me. And if you had a lover in the way I have you, it would not by half betray my love as does your vague and chainless thought, which wanders, soars, or vanishes, returns, changes, astonishes, or chills, or burns, is unresisting, plastic, freely wrought under my hands. Yet to no unison of my life and of yours, upon this brink, I watch you now and think of all that has been preached or sung or spoken of woman's tragedy and woman's fall, and all the pictures of a woman broken by man's superior strength. Yet there you stand. Your heart and life is firmly in command of your resolve as mine is, knowing all of man, the master, and his power to harm, his rulership of spheres material, bread, customs, rules of fair repute. What are they all against your slender arm, which long since plucked the fruit of good and evil, and of life at last, and now of life? For dancing, you have cast veil after veil of ideals or pretense with which men clothe the being feminine to satisfy their lordship or their sense of ownership and hide the things of sin. You have thrown them all aside, veil after veil, and there you stand, unarmored, weirdly frail, yet strong as nature, making comical the poems and tales of woman's fall. You nod your head, you smile. I feel the air made by the closing door. I lie and stare at it now shut. 1, 2. Your tufted steps die on the velvet of the outer hall. You have escaped. And I would not pursue, though we are but caged creatures, I and you, a male and female tiger in a zoo, for I shall wait you. Life himself will track your wanderings and bring you back and shut you up again with me and cage our love and hatred and our silent rage.
One thing I gather from that is there seems to be, rather than there's a very balanced opinion of men and women needing each other throughout. He refers to, he doesn't just, he makes a comment about men kind of feeling like they're superior and have to dominate the woman, but he also makes note that the woman has a sort of a subtle power over the man and they both need each other. That's what I gather from, the totality of the poem.
Exactly. Men think women need them.
Mm-hmm.
But she has independent life meanwhile.
Mm-hmm.
And he suddenly twigs to it, and it makes him really uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And then by the end, he even backtracks. He say, I shall wait you, life himself. And of course, life is a guy. Life himself will
Mm-hmm.
track your wanderings and bring you back. But he's already had this insight that things are more equal. He has less power. The myths and tales are just that, myths and
Mm-hmm.
tales that don't really
Right.
apply. Yeah, rather forward looking, particularly for a male writer
Of that
as early
period.
as 1916.
Yeah, absolutely. Very interesting poem. It's descriptive, and there's a lot of emotion and a lot of passion. The physical beauty, and then you go, like we said, we go into the power dynamics, and he represents that in his own way as not. There's more to the picture than we would assume, especially as men looking at the
Right.
power dynamics. It's assumed that we're intended to be in control or something, especially in a period where the fundamentalists, were really kind of, running rampant, and the biblical tale that he refers to in that, the myth of of Adam and Eve, and you picked the fruit, and all this, and he's being more, I guess, egalitarian in his worldview in the poem than say the society itself would be at that time,
and locating it right in the heart of a sexual relationship.
Mm-hmm. Which is a lot more controversial,
Absolutely.
Yeah. So would you like to share another poem with us?
Oh, sure. I share them all day long.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Me too.
But I know time's limited.
Yeah.
Let me go for
maybe one from Masters and then one from yourself after that.
So one more from Masters and then one of mine?
Sure, that'll work.
Okay. In that case, I'm going to shift gears to another great theme of Masters, particularly in his later work, what he calls the invisible landscape.
Okay.
Major.
What an imaginative writer. It's, it seems like we don't have so many writers that have such a broad depth of vision anymore in a lot of ways. It's hard to find them. I'm sure there's a few out there. They're kind of probably hiding from us.
He's the son of Walt Whitman.
Yeah, absolutely.
Rather disgruntled and angry son of Walt Whitman, but a son nonetheless. He's got that breadth, the large scale ideas and feelings.
Mm-hmm.
This one is from 1942, and it's called The Prairie Sand Ridge.
Right.
To contemplate the prairies is to fathom time, to guess at infinite space, to find the earth spirit in a dreaming mood. In Illinois, the prairies are a soul, a muse of distance eyeing solitude. It is not the mountain soul, the lonely face of the desert, nor that of the many-hued abyss of the canyon. Though here there is no goal for the eye but grass, and levels to the horizon's rim, they are a sea of earth, and they have waves when the winds sweep over them, and dim and brighten the fields, and the shadow of the hawk. The cloud is hurried over miles of grass dotted with barns and houses, long-heaped graves and country yards. Breaking the stillness, a cock may crow afar and charm the sleeping air, as white clouds with an ancient mission pass. Crows may fly over, as the sunlight's glare mingles with stillness which the grasshopper scarcely disturbs with his somnolent whir. But to the north, a river's flow is shored by the drift of hills enclosing prairie land, and over all a blinding light is poured in which the banners of the corn expand and breathe and flutter, gathering a hoard of sweetness for the harvest. Above all is the spirit of the scene, the mystical presence, not holy nature and not man, but made of these, made even of the dead whose living hands reaped here, and who began with prairie plows to subdue and cultivate this vastness, and who met the human fate and sank into this earth. They interfuse, with deity added, these voiceless miles of meadows. They have become the earth. Kincaid, MacDowell, Ensley, Watkins, Miles, Houghton, and Masters speak here as the muse of this domain. They whisper of toil, of mirth in the gracious days before the Republic, grown with the lust of trade to power imperial and battleships to man the farthest seas, sapped all this realm and gnawed to the very bone the substance of their descendants, to the fall of liberty and bread, even as tyrannies did this. For now is tyranny masked as a benefactor, a slow disease, progressive, fatal, has ruined liberty. No lesson can be learned. The ancient wars, corruptions, thefts, degenerating the mind give no instruction now, none saving this. Man cannot ruin the good earth. All the scars of spears upon Acadia, Macedon, Thessaly, Sparta did not blind the recreative shining of the sun, nor take away the soil's fertility. These prairies will be here after man has done his worst to ruin life. As long as the sea rolls round the earth, these prairies here, surviving the death of hope, of liberty, will brood upon the centuries year by year and tell of plenty, peace, domestic joy, and labor recompensed, and rugged health, and hearths unanxious, and honest wealth in this beneficent land of Illinois.
So much there, especially like the thought that nature and man are one in a sense in that poem. It's like we're part of nature. We're not separate as often assumed, in different periods of human history. I mean, people have thought of it, we're masters of nature. And in that poem, it's like we're incorporated in nature, and nature's actually above us in a lot of ways because it will outlive the mental landscapes and the prairies and all of this. He presents in the poem will be with us or will exist after us if we do, like it says, it will do our worst, and still nature will live and survive, and the beauty will still be there. It's quite an interest, and the language is feels like a sort of like the romantic period almost, but
It's a bit of Wordsworth.
Yeah, it's not quite a romantic poem though. When it comes to the ideas, it sounds like.
Agreed.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's a little more, I suppose, informed by fact.
Yeah, scientific. Yeah.
Yes, and the growing understanding that we really are not a separate thing from the earth, much as we still, in the year 2021, still would like to think so.
Right.
And the Comfort Masters takes in the idea that man cannot ruin the good land is maybe not as true as he thought it was 70 years ago. I hope he's right. I hope he turns out to be right.
We'll destroy ourselves before before I think nature gets wiped out, but we can definitely do quite a bit of damage, it seems like.
As the guy says in Jurassic Park, life finds a way.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll be discarded.
Absolutely. So why don't you share one of your own poems with us?
All right. I'm going to grab something out of my current book, which is a sort of semi-fictional account of the famous Bronte family.
Okay.
Specifically about their personal lives, their day-to-day lives in their home in a little northern village, northern English village. And this is just one I pulled out from near the end of the book. I think it is self-explanatory.
Okay.
It is from the point of view of Charlotte thinking about her sister Emily, who has died a couple of years prior to this moment. And it's called Part of the Rain. Great sheets of it are blowing through the front garden, pelting the berry branches, drenching the parlor window panes where Charlotte stands alone, fancying all of this is simply Emily, strongest of her beloved dead, who, folding back her blanket of church floor stone, has resurrected herself, and even now is striding the storm-riven moors again, like a part of the rain.
Interesting. Wow, and it's very succinct, and I love your emotive reading style. It's really captures that, the voice and the cadence of your voice. A very beautiful poem too, by the way.
Much obliged to you.
Thank you, and thank you for reading that. And one last question before we conclude. a body and soul. I mentioned earlier we would talk about that a little bit. What are you exploring there in that book? It was put out by Lummox, and I'm just curious. Like, it's a very intriguing story, which if I understand, it's partially a true story. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
I am sort of betwixt and between as a writer. I don't write creative nonfiction because I give myself freedom to change the facts wherever I need to. This was a story that was sort of loaned to me by a source who prefers to remain anonymous, and I was given full creative license to use the material to alter it as I needed to. It's a once in 10 lifetimes opportunity. I am incredibly fortunate and privileged to have been able to write this book at all. It concerns a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. But that's not to say there aren't some happy and beautiful moments in the story that I tell. It sounds rather grim on the face of it, but it is a story of survival. It is a triumph of the human spirit, if I can offer up such a cliche. My character, as the person in real life, did survive by virtue of her own considerable grit and courage.
And there are flickers of mythology in there, like you use La Lorna, and tell us a little bit about what that is and how it's incorporated into the story.
Perhaps rather loosely. When I was researching the story out in New Mexico, one of the things that almost distracted me from the story materials itself was the layering of cultures in the American Southwest. You have, of course, the indigenous Pueblo layer, the Native Americans who would not be dislodged. And you have the Hispanic layer, the conquistadors who didn't quite conquer and stayed in the land themselves. And then finally the Anglo culture, and they exist in layers. They don't really intermix. You have all three of them going on simultaneously out there, and that fascinated me. And I brought some of that into the book, partly just as interstices in the story, partly to create some context for the story, and partly just because the tales fascinated me.
It's a kind of literary archaeology of sorts.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's quite interesting. It was an interesting book. I read it and enjoyed it, and thought, it was quite interesting, the various devices and the layers of storyline going on in that book. And I was captivated by it. It was a very interesting story. So in conclusion, is there anything you would like to, any advice or words of encouragement you'd like to share with our viewers?
Words of encouragement for other writers?
Yeah, or viewers, people that are even readers, especially writers, though.
For readers, good books are still out there. For writers, keep working. The important thing is the work itself. I struggle with this because we all like attention. We would like some recognition and pats on the back for the work we do, but doing the work itself is the greatest thrill. It's the greatest privilege.
And just get out there and do some creative work. Is there anybody you'd like to give a shout out to or thank you for their, for working with you or for being an encouragement personally?
My wife and son, for all they have put up with over the years of writing books and grumbling and whining and groaning about doing those things. Elizabeth, my wife of 38 and a half years, our son Spencer, who is embarking on his own good life in Japan as a teacher of English.
Oh, wow. Great. Excellent.
Them above all.
Well, thank you for joining us today, Ryan. It's really been interesting to learn about Edgar Lee Masters. And for those who are watching the program, we will have the selected edition of Edgar Lee Masters' poetry, first of its kind, coming out from Transcendent Zero Press as of about January, February 2022. So keep an eye out on that, and keep an eye out for reviews and for commentary on the book. And check out Ryan's other work, the ones we mentioned, Body and Soul and Home Truths. Just keep a lookout for him. He's an excellent writer, wonderful, thoughtful presenter of literature. This has been New York Parrot's Literary Corner. If you'd like to donate anybody out there with a little extra money, you can do that through paypal.me/nyparrot. Just look at that banner right there, and that's our PayPal. We would love to get some little extra cash to help production wise and continue our project. And if you want to be a guest on the show, then I will be more than happy to hear from you. Just email Dustin Pickering at literarycorner@newyorkparrot.com. And I will be more than happy to schedule a day for you to be interviewed if you're a creative mind, a creative writer. Also, if you have music you'd like to put on the program, music video of your own, or any kind of spoken word piece that you'd like us to share, we'd love to hear from you. We need more of this entertainment for our program, so we definitely would love to give you some free marketing. And just thanks for the viewers out there. If you haven't subscribed to our channel on YouTube, just hit that subscribe button. Blink, blank, blank. There you are. And you'll be notified when we come live. And you can watch us on Facebook and keep an eye out for when the program comes on. So it's different times and different days. So definitely be back pretty soon here. We'll be back on here Tuesday. We're taking a break for tomorrow. So we'll be back Tuesday. This is the only daily show on earth for creative writers. We're using our platform to promote creative writing and literary endeavors. So please be a sport. We love you guys. Keep writing, keep reading, and be in touch with me if you want to be on the program. This is New York Parrot's Literary Corner. Have an excellent afternoon, and thank you again for being a viewer.
They often wonder aloud, can't we go back to the good old days when protesters were like Martin Luther King Jr., peaceful?
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light?
We answer, have you forgotten he was murdered as well?
What so proudly we held at the twilight's last gleaming.
Hoses, dogs, batons beat faces and heads, causing blood to spill.
Whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous
jail cells moaned for relief as they were filled past capacity with black men in three-piece suits.
O'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming.
Bridges blocked on a bloody Sunday.
And the rockets reckless, the bombs bursting in air.
A church firebombed, flames dispatching 4 innocent little black girls off to see heaven's gates.
The Literary Corner, brought to you by New York Parrot TV, the voice